Hey guys, how you doing? Welcome to the video. In this video, I'm going to be showing you the transaxle that I got for Wratchet. So guys, this is the HV25 transaxle. The HV, I believe, stands for Hybrid Vanagon. I guess at some point in time, they somewhat designed this based off of the Vanagon transaxle. There was originally an HV1, which there still is. You can still buy the HV1. After that, they made some changes and they called it the HV2. And on the HV2, there was a 4-speed, which is the HV24, or there's a 5-speed, which is the HV25. When I was going through all of my options, and I'll go over the options that I was weighing in a minute here. When I was going over the options, I felt like for an extra $1,000 to have 5th gear was going to be pretty good. I had this geared so that 1st through 4th is basically close ratio, and then 5th gear, it kind of takes a big step up, so it's like my overdrive. On the Mauler over there, it's got a bus type 2 transaxle with the 537 ring and pinion, and 1st through 4th on it is pretty good, but once you hit 55 miles an hour, the RPMs are screaming, which isn't the worst thing in the world, but it's not really fun driving it at higher speeds, like on the road, because it's just screaming. So I figured with this, I would opt for that 5th gear so that I can put it in 5th and bring those RPMs way down when I'm on the road, just to make it a little bit more pleasant cruising around. So when I was shopping around and I hadn't decided what transaxle I was going to go with yet, there was about half a dozen options that I had, or at least that I was interested in. There was this one, which is the HV25, roughly about $10,000. There's the version of this, which is the HV24, which is $9,000. These have a 10-inch ring and pinion. These also have a full-size reverse gear. They come with a Volkswagen bell housing. However, you can also order a Chevy, like for an LS, bell housing that would bolt right on, so you would not need an adapter for this transaxle. I really liked that because there's a good chance that once I'm done playing around with the Ecotech on this, I'll want to upgrade to an LS, and this transaxle would more than happily accept an LS, and roughly, according to Weddell, it'll handle up to about 550 horsepower. It would probably take me a while before I had an LS that was spitting out more than 550 horsepower. So this will handle anything that the Ecotech can throw at it, and it can also take a moderately modified LS. So I felt like that was going to buy me a long time of tinkering with the Wratchet chassis before I get to the point where I'm pushing this transaxle to the limits. Then a step up from this, Weddell has what they call the S4D. The S4D is a sequential shift transaxle, and it has a 11.5-inch ring and pinion. So it's a significantly larger transaxle, capable of more horsepower as well. That transaxle comes with the Chevy LS bell housing and also is $14,000. So the fact that that transaxle was $4,000 more and was really only set up for an LS, I felt like starting with an Ecotech on that would be kind of silly, unnecessary, and that I would be spending money that I didn't need to spend. So I kind of went away from that. They also have the S4, which is also a sequential shifting, bigger transaxle than this. That one, though, has the a 10-inch ring and pinion, which is the same size ring and pinion as this transaxle, and it also has the Volkswagen bell housing. So that transaxle cost $12,000, so for $2,000 more, I was getting a bigger, stronger transaxle that was sequential shift, but I didn't want to go that route because I felt like if I outgrew this, I would want to go to something with a larger ring and pinion. And also, guys, bear in mind, if you have some of these transmissions that I'm talking about that I tell you I didn't go with, does not mean they're bad transmissions. These are all fantastic transmissions. They are amazing compared to the bus transmission. I'm just telling you my thought process and how I came to what I did. So please don't let me offend anybody with any of this. So because of that, I didn't want to get the S4 knowing that the S4D was out there. And so then that basically brought me down to Weddell has an MD4 and an MD5. And the MD is pretty similar to the HV Transaxle. It still has a 10-inch ring and pinion, so it's fairly strong. I believe it does not have a full-size reverse gear. It still is troubled like the bus Transaxle, where it has a really small reverse gear. That's another thing that in my head, I was saying, if I'm spending this much money, I'm gonna have a transmission that has a full-size reverse like this one does, so that if I'm stuck or if I'm backing up a hill or something like that, I don't have to worry about snapping reverse. That's not something that, if I'm paying this much money, I wanna have to worry about. One thing that you can kind of do to look at the, let's call it the girth of these transaxles, is you can look at their weight. And this transaxle is 165 pounds. The MD5, I think, was 145 pounds. And to give you an idea, the S4D is 185 pounds. So these transaxles, as they get stronger, they get bigger and heavier, obviously. And if you compare this to the bus transaxle, this transaxle makes the bus transaxle look like a midget. Now, having this transaxle is going to allow me to start working on the rear suspension of Wratchet. Wratchet thus far, obviously I've been going full steam ahead on the front suspension, and I've started working on the interior because for the most part none of that has anything to do with the rear transmission. You can see that the rear of the Wratchet chassis I have literally done nothing with, and that's because there's pretty much nothing I can do with this without the transaxle. The transaxle itself is going to establish so many points on that transaxle that there was nothing that I could really do without it. Now that I have this transaxle, I can start figuring some things out. The first thing that I need to figure out is what I'm going to do for rear drive shafts. You can see on the Mauler here I went with flange yokes which bolt onto the Volkswagen Type 2 CV adapters, and that allowed me to run U-joints. I might do that on this transmission. I have not fully decided yet. I do like experimenting with things like that. I have started scouring the internet to see if there are flange yokes that would bolt right onto that would allow me to run U-joint drive shafts. I'm not 100% sure yet. What the flange yoke will allow me to do is it establishes the pivot point for my rear suspension. You know, it'll, right in the middle of this U-joint is the pivot point that I'm going to want my lower control arm to pivot off of, so that the geometry of the rear suspension is in line with the drive shafts. That way I'll set it up so that as the suspension goes through its travel, the drive shaft itself doesn't actually have to change length at all. It'll still have a spline in there like this one, so that if there's some small changes, or if I'm, you know, barrel rolling or something and things are bending, this drive shaft has the ability to collapse. But I'm going to set the geometry up perfectly in the Wratchet chassis so that the drive shaft itself doesn't actually have to change at all as it goes through its motion. But another thing that this transaxle seems to lend itself to, just by design, you look at this large area that this transaxle has here, and the starter mounts up high in the middle. If you compare that to the bus transmission, the bus transmission is real crowded. You can see that the starter is right up above it, actually quite close there. And the chassis is in the way also, but the chassis, that could be rectified. But that transmission does not have the space around the output flanges like this one does. And I'm thinking all that space could possibly allow me to run what they call inboard brakes. And what this would be is I would have my CV or my flange yoke coming out here with the drive shaft, and then there would be some sort of adapter. I wouldn't use this one specifically, I'm just using this to show you, but there would be some sort of adapter that also bolts onto here and then would would come out pretty similar to this, and then it would hold a brake rotor, and then mounted up on the chassis here, somewhere around here, rigid mounted to the chassis, would be my calipers. So all of the brake components would be inboard, mounted to the chassis, and then the drive shaft would run out to the rear hub assembly, and then it would not have any brakes on it at that point. Now, I'm not saying that's what I'm going to do. I'm not saying that's possible. What I am saying is, just by the design of this transaxle, I see so much space here, it seems possible. So that is, as I'm looking at parts and finding out if I'm going to go with CVs or if I find some flange yoke adapters and figure out what I'm going to do there, that'll kind of let me know what I have to work with. Because I'll tell you right now, if I could design this for inboard brakes, I think that would be super cool. That would take so much, let's call it unsprung weight off of the rear tires, that would be a pretty good performance improvement. But we'll see how that pans out. That's just what I'm thinking now. If some of you guys are watching this and have some ideas or know of some parts to facilitate that or have done it before, give me a heads up, please. So you're not going to see me immediately, like the next video is not going to be on me installing this and starting to work on the rear suspension or anything like that. I do need a little bit of time to wrap my head around this, kind of think out some of these ideas. A lot of times I can think about these ideas over and over and over, and I can go through a lot of the R&D process kind of in my head as I'm just thinking and thinking and thinking. So for the next probably month or two, you'll see this floating around. You might see it mocked up in the back of the Wratchet chassis on some of the videos, but at this point I'm just gathering parts, gathering thoughts, trying to figure out what I'm going to do. If you have any specific questions about the transaxle or anything like that, if you guys are thinking about doing something like this yourself, go ahead and hit me up in the comments. But that's about it for this video. I just wanted to show you guys that I do have the transaxle, and we're going to be able to build the Wratchet chassis for some serious performance. I am going to start with it with an Ecotech motor. I know a lot of you guys think that that's way too small of a motor, but I think I'm going to start with an Ecotech motor and kind of work through some of the bugs on the chassis, get things going really well. I'll probably try and put a nice size turbo on the Ecotech so that I can get some pretty good performance out of it. But with this transaxle, if the time comes where I'm ready to go to an LS, this transmission will handle it, so that will be good for me. So guys, thanks for watching the video. Hope it's helping you with some of your projects, and I hope to see you on the next one. Take care.